Welcome back to another episode of Rail Industry Connected. I'm Dan Clark, and thank you for joining us. The reliance on technology is becoming increasingly important on the railways. This technology allows for more efficient working and, most importantly, enhanced safety for frontline colleagues. Key to the success of this technology, though, is correct implementation. And while technology is beneficial, ensuring that it doesn't entirely replace human action, with those operating with the technology demonstrating the correct behaviours, is essential. Today, I speak to Jules Reed from Tended. Tended is a multi-award winning wearable technology company on a mission to prevent workplace accidents and save lives. Combining innovation with behavioural science, it has created cutting-edge wearables that are transforming worksite safety using geospatial technology to reduce the risk of accidents and incidents on site. Jules is the head of behavioural science at Tended, and she's passionate about improving employee experiences through safety, well-being, and leadership enhancement, and has previously led culture and behavioural change programs at HS2, Interserve, and Balfour Beatty. Jules, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, why is it important that we learn to trust technology, and especially in the case of Tended and its geospatial technology?
Um, I think the first thing is that, as you quite rightly said, we're just going to be using technology more and more and more. It's the future, isn't it? And so human beings at the moment have this innate mistrust. And part and parcel of my job working with Tended is to help people kind of get over their own barriers and understand their, their own resistance. Because if you think about it, especially this is especially true when working somewhere, is we use our sat navs, and that's replaced obviously a physical paper map, and we
Yes.
use Google instead of going to the library, and we use our phones for entertainment and information and all of that sort of stuff. And do you know the difference between us choosing technology to make our lives better and being given technology in a workplace is about two lots of trust there. The
Mm,
first is, can we trust our employers not to use this to track us? It's one of the first questions we ever get asked. Is
mm.
it going to be used as a performance tool rather than a safety tool? And then the second thing is, we do as human beings, if we think we have to rely on the technology, then that's a mistrust. If we choose technology, but we're not relying on it as much, then we'll give it a little bit more trust. But generally speaking, we don't trust technology.
So, what is the problem then? Why do we trust technology less than humans when actually it can be more accurate?
Look, this is absolutely it's bonkers because humans make about 50 mistakes a day,
Mm,
and whilst technology is making about 50 mistakes a month. And I'm going to caveat that because, in all honesty, the numbers are a bit vague when it comes to technology. And of course, it does depend on the technology that you use. But
yeah.
50 on average per month is significantly less than 50 a day for human beings. And the thing is, the human beings, when they make the mistakes, they are so random. They vary. There is an infinite number of ways that a human being can make a mistake. So that makes them pretty unpredictable. But when technology makes a mistake, because it's programmed, it means that errors are much more predictable and they're actually very easy to find and fix.
Mm.
So that's one reason that we don't sort of, it's bonkers the way that we feel that we can trust a human being more than we can trust machines because, you know, science says that that's not the case. Now, with humans, we tend to give people the benefit of the doubt. And that's because when we meet a human for the first time, we're looking to see if this person is friend or foe. And we do that with nuances in body language, and we sort of base our trust on those first impressions. And so when we think that somebody is okay and they're not a threat, we naturally give them some trust, and then it's theirs to lose. But with technology, we do this entirely the other way around. We don't trust its reliability. We tend to want to get evidence through experience that we think, is this capable of us giving our trust to it. But the thing is, because people do this subconsciously and they don't actually know that they're misaligned with the facts, if you like, then it's up to me it's part of my job to go and create that conscious awareness and get them to understand that there is this misalignment, that they are subconsciously relying on human beings who will make lots more mistakes, but not trusting technology will make far less mistakes. And I do that through training, and I go out there and I'm almost evangelical about making sure that people understand the way they think and how that's sort of fallible, if you like.
And how do you change that mindset? It's really interesting what you said there about, you know, basing everything on experience, which you can understand to an extent. But when we have things like mobile phones and tablets, especially being implemented on the railways more so nowadays, we use that as part of our daily operations now. There's a trust there. When we're introducing new technology, how do you shift that mindset? Because obviously, as you say, it's within the subconscious. So how do you change that?
It's about getting people to understand themselves. It's a bit like I always use the analogy that if you're buying a new car and you know the make and the model and the color that you
Mm.
want, you'll go out onto the road and suddenly you'll see loads of them where you'd never seen them before. And if this is the same sort of thing, it's just about getting people to, it's education really. It's just about getting people
Yeah.
to understand um, their fallibility, because a lot of the mechanisms that the brain uses, this being a point here, is that we're wired for survival, and we're wired for survival in a very primitive sort of way. I mean, we only needed to eat, sleep, find shelter, mate. People have heard me say this so many times, but that primitive part of your brain, which is your survival instinct, only knows how to survive in order to be able to do those four things. Um, Whereas in our complex social system, and certainly in work, and certainly when we put on ourselves in work situations that are dangerous, these brain mechanisms actually trip us up. And so I think what happens is whenever I go and do any training, um, people are they're surprised at their fallibility
Mm.
and what I'm saying, but they also resonate with it as well. They know as soon as I'm saying what telling them what they do, they're kind of nodding and saying, "Oh yes, that's exactly what we do." I was telling them a story about a study that had been done, and a group of students were given a piece of information that they knew were the study knew was wrong. The students didn't, and they were asked afterwards. This human being gave you some wrong information. Do you trust that person anymore? Have you lost confidence? And that trust and confidence only dropped by 8%. But when they
Blimey.
did the exact same experiment with the technology giving the exact same wrong information, when they asked the same students afterwards where their trust and confidence was, it had dropped by 95%, with
Wow.
a percentage of some of them saying that they would never recover from it, they would never use that technology again. So when you start telling human beings that kind of thing, and then giving them the statistics about technology is actually more reliable than human beings, at least you're getting them out of that automatic mindset and into sort of a growth mindset, I suppose, and willing to sort of study their the way they think. and maybe start to give the technology a little bit more credibility.
Do you think that's maybe though because with humans we accept that they do make mistakes, so we give them a greater room, a margin for error, whereas as you say, technology makes less mistakes, so when it does make a mistake, we immediately go, right, there is something wrong with it. We aren't using it again.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's several reasons for that. You're absolutely right. And I think one of the reasons that human beings don't trust technology straight off is because we never had, I've just said that our brains are wired for a primitive survival. There was no
Mm.
such thing as technology, and so our brains naturally look for interpersonal connections to see whether we could trust a person or not. And we do this in subtle ways. We do this like through body language, um, more than anything. And of course, you can't get that from a machine. So it's one of the ways that we find it difficult to just automatically trust something that's inanimate. And of course, as you quite rightly said, we know that people will make mistakes. And we're more than happy to forgive that, partly because we know we'll make mistakes, so it would be a bit hypocritical. But we have a culture whereby we believe that to err is human and to forgive is divine. But we don't extend that to technology because it isn't human. And as you quite rightly said, there is an expectation that if you program technology in, it should deliver
Yeah.
whatever it's meant to deliver time and time again, 100%. And we don't give any margin there as we would with human being. We can't forgive it, in other words. So if technology does fail to deliver its intended purpose, and the user gets a bad experience, then it takes a much longer time to recover from that. And that's if it's recovered from at all. You know, we tend to, as I said, as you've said, we tend to give people the benefit of the doubt and we'll
Mm.
give them another chance. We tend not to do that with technology.
No, and I think on the railways as well, we can't give as much room for human error because we work in such a safety critical environment. So that is obviously why technology is being introduced more so, and that's what you are doing at Tended, especially from a geospatial point of view. I think that's incredibly important nowadays that that is introduced onto the railways as an important safety measure. Tell me a little bit more about the technology that you're using and how it benefits people on the railways.
So, first of all, just to sort of cement in what you've just said, most of the accidents that happen on the railway have some element of human error, whether that's people have been distracted or they're too focused or they're fatigued. One of the reasons that our device has come about is because Network Rail looked back over 10 years worth of incidents, and every single one of them, without exception, had an element of human error.
Mm.
And this is one of the reasons that people stray and lose situational awareness. And that's kind of, they've umbrellaed all of that human error under one sort of package, and they say people lose situational awareness. And so our device has been created in order to give that timely tap on the shoulder to the wearer if they should stray out of a safe zone. So the technology basically is in two parts. There's a dashboard that is created by an ES or a planner. Um, they create like virtual safe zones using um, the centerline data and roller tools, and it's highly accurate. And then they assign a device, and they assign it either as a wearable, which means that the person on the ground, the worker, is going to actually physically put it on their person. And whenever they are in that safe zone, it just keeps them safe in there. They can't be tracked in there. It's not visible on the dashboard. This is a personal safety device. It's part of the PPE, really. And then the other way is to assign it as an asset. And that way, an ES can actually see that asset on the dashboard moving around. They can talk to the machine controllers, and they can make sure that everything is where it should be at the right speed, at the right time. Just makes the site very visible instead of the usual sort of phone calls. And again, if we bring this back to trust, if you think about an EES starting a site, getting works moving, or stopping a site because something, a train's coming through or whatever, they are relying on not only a phone call and making their instructions very clear so the other person understands it, but then also then the person on the other end, maybe the COS or the PIC, will be saying, yes, I've done what you've instructed, but there is no kind of visible check on that. And this is another thing about human beings. We believe what we see. So in that respect, getting that phone call is a massive amount of trust. And in all honesty, this is where a massive amount of the mistakes come in. Our technology takes that away. And if I'm being honest, I talk a lot about people not trusting technology, but I've not spoken to an ES yet who's not been grateful for that live view.
Perfect. And that's exactly what we need on a safety critical environment such as the railways. But technology is also only as good as the humans actually implementing it in the first place, and implementing it correctly. What measures do you recommend put in place to ensure that frontline colleagues are actually using it as it's intended?
Yeah. So we do training. So every single discipline throughout the process is trained, from ESs, planners, obviously assistant ESs, COS, PICOPs. Every single person gets their individual training, but they also get like an umbrella training, a universal
Mm.
training, so that they know the whole system from end to end. But then they also know where they fit into that. So there's a lot of training. There's a huge amount of information available on our customer zone, so people can at any time from the dashboard click in and just, if there's something they're unsure about, they can just click in there and they can find things really quickly. And it's very comprehensive. Most of it is short videos. So again, it's just listening through, being shown how, and then anything they've forgotten to do, or even with troubleshooting, they can use that. Of course, we do have people support as well. So we have WhatsApp, which really gives people an instant support. And so we always try and get back to people within 10 minutes during work hours. Anything outside of those hours, we say 30 minutes. We'll get back. And if it's an emergency, they'll get somebody more or less straight away. So we do provide a really good service for making sure that people know exactly what they're doing. And then on top of that, I go in with the behavioural stuff. So with ESs and planners, for example, they'll do their physical training on the dashboard. Then I go in and talk about the trust and confidence that they need to build into what they're doing, and how they can do that with the people on site, as well as then working with COS and workforce to talk about why people lose situational awareness. So I think we give a really comprehensive service to our clients, so that I think that no stone is unturned.
We now know that technology makes less mistakes than humans, but is there any time that humans have outperformed technology?
Sure. Um, well, so I guess one of the first things to say is that human beings can correct themselves. Again, it's part of our culture that, if we make mistakes and we learn from them, then that's why it's so forgivable. I mean, our brains are wired to constantly learn, and one of the best ways to learn is by making mistakes. So again, that makes it very forgivable. However, when technology makes a mistake, it doesn't put itself right, generally speaking. It usually
No.
takes a human to put it right. And I guess in that respect, humans will outperform. technology, we also tend to trust technology if there's a human being behind it. So, for
Mm,
example, one study showed that when people go to an ATM, they don't necessarily trust that there's going to be money there when they demand it. What they do trust is that the money will be there because of the people at the bank with those with their that they're managing those accounts. So we don't tend to trust the automated algorithms on our phone, for example, that they won't manipulate our viewing or spending behavior. So the difference there is if you've got technology that's using algorithms, in other words, it's the technology that's behind what you're viewing and seeing. We don't trust that. But if there's a human behind it, then we're more likely to trust the technology. And again, this comes back to our, the way our technology is used, because we're not taking the person away and replacing them with technology. The ES and the planner is still there. They're still managing the sites in exactly the same way as they've always done. It just
mm.
means that they're now supplementing with technology, which is going to give them a better view and less errors.
And further supplementation in the railways is very, very important. What does it mean for the rail industry and companies like Tended trying to implement a system like this into the network?
Yeah. Um, so I think if I if I dare say this as an older person, I think it'll get easier just with generational shifts, because there is an
Mm,
expectation, I think, in younger generations that technology will be used, and obviously it will become more popular generally just to make efficiencies. But I think in particular around safety, it's important. As I said, humans make mistakes, they lose situational awareness, and it is the biggest cause of accidents and incidents. And technology can significantly reduce these errors, either by supporting safer behaviour and also by raising safety awareness, or if it's necessary, even replacing a person. Because at the end of the day, we don't want accidents. I understand why people very often will say to me, will this end up replacing somebody? And it never will, because obviously there's got to be somebody
no.
programming it in and feeding it in information and stuff. But my analogy is that when motor cars first started on the roads, they had on every corner, they had a man with a flag that allowed cars to pass, and this man kept getting killed. And so eventually they put him on a little podium to try and sort of reduce the incidents, and still this man was getting killed. And then eventually some bright spark who understood behavioural nudges put a line in the road and said, let's just put lines in the road and keep people on, in their lane. And suddenly there was no need for a man who wasn't getting killed, and people weren't having crashes. So sometimes technology needs to replace a human being, not all the time.
And what barriers have you seen so far getting technology like this adopted, especially within the rail industry? And talking
Yeah,
about the mistrust earlier that we do
yeah,
have initially of technology, where are the
yeah.
barriers?
So I think human beings are naturally resistant to change. Again, it's part of your survival instinct. If something's
Mm,
familiar, then you know what you're up against. So there's an element of that. Um, but also, I've sort of just mentioned about the age difference as well. I was reading a study, and it said that 90% of jobs require some technology skills, but only a third of heavy industries, such as trackside workers, they haven't got those skills or even the inclination sometimes to learn that something radically new, like a piece of equipment, and especially if it looks complicated. And again, part and parcel of my job is to support the tech team, especially when in the user experience, is to say, look, we can have a complicated piece of technology, but to the user, this has to be so simple. So that's one of the sort of ways that we're trying to reduce this resistance. But there
Mm.
is an older demographic in the rail industry specifically. And people over the age of 50 generally use 36% less technology than younger people. And people over 60 are 96% more likely to be technophobic. And I think this is a lot because, and of course, I'm generalizing here for sure, but when we get a new phone as an older demographic, we tend to use it for only the things we're familiar with already. So we'll learn as much as we know already. Whereas the young generation will like really dig into it and they'll understand all the functionality and they'll use all the functionality and they'll use things like Snapchat and they'll do gaming and, you know, that they just are far more immersed in technology. And so as we get newer generations coming in through railway, then I think it will be far more accepted. And I think the trust will be higher than it is with the older demographic. Um, but there are external issues. There's a worry that, as I said, that technology might replace people. And if, you know, people don't want to lose their livelihood, um, and I think maybe the older generations have seen this sometimes when new initiatives have come along and it's lost people their jobs. And of course, it's heavily unionized in the rail industry. So there's been this kind of legacy of resistance to anything new coming in that might be a threat to a job. Our technology doesn't do that. It's just a supplement, as I've said. And then the other thing that causes resistance, as I've alluded to before, is people do believe, in fact, it's the first thing that people say to us is it going to track us? And you know, part of the standard network rail standard says that this technology can't be used for trawling, which is essentially tracking, and of course
Mm.
we have to adhere to that. I have to say, I've just asked our tech department, can we put some stats behind this? Because we've got hours upon hours, thousands of hours of usage of our devices now. And I haven't yet, and I've asked my colleagues, and they haven't yet ever known that our technology has been used as a performance tool. So, whilst I understand that people do worry about these things, the worry comes from past experience rather than what they've got in front of them now. And what they've got in front of them now is proving they're now getting evidence through experience that this technology isn't being used to track them.
With the generational shift discussion there, I think that's really interesting. I feel quite fortunate in a way that I'm of an age where I've actually seen the transition of how it used to be, and obviously the less usage of technology, as it were, through to the implementation of technology as we see it today. And you're right in what you say, where as generations go on and we introduce younger people into the railways, that will reduce in time. But the workforce currently on the railways is aging significantly. So how do we, as individuals and as businesses, overcome those generational shift barriers that we're facing currently?
it's it's easing people in at a pace that is comfortable to them. I think one of the things, that legacy that I'm talking about, is that a new initiative comes along, it's plonked onto the workforce, it's kind of get on with it, and the brain, it goes into shock. You know, when we're faced with change, we use what's called adaptive energy, and we don't like it. It doesn't feel good, and so what we do differently is we do what we call a socialization period. And all it's doing really is just easing the brain into the change. And this is particularly, you know, for people who are resistant to technology, this is so important. So we put a lot more effort into preparing for deployment and then there's the appropriate amount of effort, obviously, through deployment. But if you look at our onboarding, there is a lot more we do before we deploy, and part and parcel of that is this socialization. um we do that slowly and gently, so it's almost like that kind of tell them it's coming, then show them what it is, then explain why it's necessary, and then give them a demonstration. All of that's in a safe space, so they're getting used to it. They can get rid of all that resistance and voice, any concerns they've got. And then we start to think about deployment. And truthfully, it seems like a big investment up front, but in all honesty, it pays dividends, because once people realize that it's not a performance tool, they're not replacing human
Mm.
beings, that actually it does work the way it's supposed to, then we talk about situational awareness. You can't really rely on a human being, and all this brings them on a journey into, okay, we'll give this a go, which is a great mindset to start them off in, because truthfully, engagement in new initiatives in the rail industry has been notoriously tough. So for us to get people in that mindset of go on, then we'll give it a go before it starts, well, then engagement's higher than it probably is ever for anything that's been brought before. So we're really giving railway workers a new experience, in terms of, change management, if you like.
Do you feel Tended so far, its success on the railways has actually been through that mix of railway knowledge and behavioural science and a focus on that? Do you feel that that's actually been a
100%.
catalyst? Mm.
100%. Yes. Because I think I think what happens is, first and foremost, is this lack of trust within the rail industry, whether that is, performance based or technology based. What tends to happen is, because we are sort of in the mix, we're there, we're visible, we are listening, we are understanding, we're taking them on this journey, which feels so much more comfortable. What tends to happen is, I think, first and foremost, the trust is transferred to us. Those people that we are dealing with trust us. And because they see that not only do we understand the issues that they face, work wise, and what we do then is help them with efficiencies. So that side of things, in terms of the technology, you've got efficiencies and safety in there, which of course they're going to want, but also we do it in a way that makes it palatable for human beings. And that's obviously the behavioural science element. It makes such a difference to people to be listened to and to be understood. And it's, like I said, it's a new experience, really.
And where can people go to find out more about Tended?
So go to the Tendered website, and have a good rummage around. There's a lot of information on there about what we do and how we do it. There's lots of giveaways on there as well. So if you want things like, if you want to see what situational awareness is from a psychological point of view, or
Yeah.
engagement from a psychological point of view, that's all on there, as well as the mechanics of the IT department as well, because I think that's a big thing. The IT department is in-house. We don't outsource it. And I always believe that if you've built something, if you've maintained it, if you continue to improve it, then it's kind of like your baby, and you kind of nurture it and look after it, and you want it to be the best it can be. And so having our IT in house means that we have that kind of dedication, as well as
Mm.
speed, when it comes to resolving any issues.
Jules, thank you very much. That's been brilliant. That was Jules Reed, the head of behavioural science from Tended. Jules raised a lot of valid points there about using behavioural science and effective training to implement technology into the railways. And I thought actually that approach seems to ensure that really, from a technological point of view, that these things will get onto the railway a lot quicker. Actually addressing some of the challenges head on from a human perspective will make a massive difference for that business, and they're already seeing the dividends there. So thank you for joining us, Jules, and sharing your insight. And thank you for joining us for another episode of Rail Industry Connected. You can view past and future episodes of Rail Industry Connected on YouTube, or listen to them on the way into work on Spotify. And of course, you can connect with other rail businesses and the industry on railindustryconnect.co.uk. Thank you and see you next time.